Thank you again so very much for being here to hear actually, a real debate and what are the real issues that are confronting the American people, the real crises that were not mentioned in this pseudo debate. The crisis of empire, the crisis of crushing inequality, the crisis of the three richest billionaires in this country having the wealth of the lower 50% altogether. Just three super rich billionaires control as much wealth as half of America all added together. The incredible corruption of our political system, the fact that that money from the oligarchs is what actually powers both the Democratic and the Republican parties, the fact of the housing crisis, that half of all Americans now are basically within one or two paychecks of evictions, that half of Americans are paying 30 to 50% of their income right now just to keep a roof over their heads, which doesn't leave much then to put food on the table, to pay your car insurance if you even have a car, to pay your student loan debts and all the rest. That's not working. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 87 million Americans do not have adequate health care. Some 18 million Americans cannot afford their pharmaceuticals, and some 8 million Americans in the last year for which the data exist were actually driven into poverty by the costs of their health care. If you develop cancer, your odds are over 40% that you're going to spend down your life savings within 2 years of trying to deal with your cancer. These are the kinds of emergencies that we did not hear about. We mostly heard, accusations of, one candidate against the other. We heard about, what great plans they each had, but we didn't hear very much about those plans. From Kamala Harris, we heard, at least what I heard, was the $6,000 child tax benefit for the first year with a new child, and a $25,000 tax credit, I think, for a down payment on a house. Now, how far is that going to get you to solving this all-out housing crisis that has caused unprecedented levels of homelessness right now and unprecedented stress among everyday Americans just trying to keep a roof over their heads? So let me talk about some of the actual solutions that we would offer. And from Donald Trump, I think we heard, well, actually, he didn't even talk about his tariffs. I think that's been his major proposal: tariffs and more tax giveaways for the super wealthy. That's not going to get us so far. I mean, for a long time, we've seen both Democrats and Republicans rely on trickle-down economics, and generally the tax breaks are passed by the Republicans, but then they are maintained. Obama wrote into permanent law, actually, the Bush tax cuts, for example. So we've seen an incredible decrease in the contributions paid by the wealthiest Americans to our economy and to our public infrastructure. Their tax contribution has absolutely plummeted, while the services are basically being cut and the public domains are all being privatized. Our roads and bridges and public spaces and so on are all getting privatized and developed and bought out from under us. At the same time that we're seeing, austerity applied to the likes of support for our schools, support for higher education. So let me again go to some of the solutions that we are putting on the table. And I'll just mention the fact that this is a debate between the parties of War and Wall Street, who agree with each other on the fundamentals of our economy and on the fundamentals of our foreign policy, basically a foreign policy based on endless war. And the endless war machine, which then in turn costs half of our congressional budget. We're spending down 50% of our congressional budget just to look at the Pentagon's expenditures. But then if you add in the costs of caring for veterans, which we do not do enough of, and so many veterans are basically up a creek without housing, without jobs, without mental health care, and so on. If you include those costs as well as the costs of nuclear weapons, which are classified separately from the Pentagon budget, if you include the costs of the security agencies like the CIA, which is carrying out its own military agenda, then it's more like 60%, even 65% of our tax dollars and of the congressional budget, which are being spent on this endless war machine. These are the fundamentals that we're absolutely missing in action from this debate because the two parties agree on it. And again, I want to stress that our campaign is the one anti-war, anti-genocide, climate emergency, pro-worker campaign, which is on the ballot across the country, that's in this election and which has the capacity to actually challenge empire, in which you have to be on the ballot across the country in order to do. And we are in the process of doing that. Again, I want to encourage everybody to go to jillstein2024.com and to join the uprising, because Americans are in an uprising. And we heard Donald Trump tonight kind of, going off the deep end as usual, mostly bashing immigrants, and trying to attribute the problems of the country to migration, when in fact migration itself is a crisis caused by the foreign policies of this country, by the endless wars and the regime change operations all around the world, by the economic takeover, by corporate capture of foreign economies and resources and labor, and as well as climate change, which has displaced millions of farmers. We've overthrown, for example, the government of Haiti innumerable times, but particularly twice under Aristide, leading to the incredible economic despair, which is driving people here to our shores. Likewise, Guatemala, most of the countries of South America actually have been overthrown by either by the CIA, or we have strong-armed their governments and installed dictators and contributed to civil wars. Guatemala is, kind of the first case in point where we overthrew their democratically elected socialist government that was going to redistribute land so that peasants could actually have a fighting chance. And at the behest of United Fruit, we overthrew the government of Guatemala, leading to essentially generations of conflict and strife and, death squads, which have been trained by the US and so on. So that migration crisis that Donald Trump loves to, endlessly bash immigrants over is basically a consequence of US foreign policy, which is driving people to our shores for refuge. And sadly, we see the Democrats who at one time stood up for principles of justice for immigrants, for addressing the underlying drivers. We don't hear about that anymore at all. We see the Democrats, Barack Obama was the deporter in chief. We're looking at Kamala Harris promoting an even more right-wing so-called border security bill. Border security is not obtained through a wall. Border security is achieved by, number one, decompressing the migration crisis by eliminating the drivers of that migration crisis. We can do that. Also, the war on drugs, I must mention, which is what empowers the violent drug cartels. That's why people are fleeing here from the drug cartels. And no, it's not the migrants who are bringing drugs across our border. It is plain old red-blooded Americans who are bringing the drugs and the fentanyl and so on across our border, not in the outer regions, but at the portals of entry. We know how to fix this. How we fix this is by legalizing marijuana, for starters, which will be part of our day one agenda, by the way. On day one, we remove marijuana, cannabis from the list of scheduled drugs. It is legalized on day one, and we pull the rug out from under the drug cartels and the violence which is driving people here. And then we proceed towards decriminalizing all drugs, so that substance use becomes a public health problem dealt with effectively through public health measures, not a criminal problem. And as part of this, by the way, on our day one agenda, we provide amnesty and we end the jail terms and the prison terms of so many people who've been unjustly incarcerated due to the war on drugs, which has largely been a war on Black and brown people. So, you know, that's Donald Trump's issue we hear about over and over again, about migrants being the cause of basically every crisis in this country, but not so whatsoever. In fact, migrants, it's well established, have they make the country safer. They have a lower crime rate than here in America. They actually lower crime. They bring stability to our communities. They are hardworking. And in fact, migrants, once they can work, they more than pay their way. That is the problem, that we've been squandering our migration dollars on billions of dollars spent on walls, which simply kill people. They kill migrants by forcing them to more and more extreme routes of migration to flee for their lives from conditions that we have caused. The border wall also kills wildlife and destroys ecosystems, and it does not address the problems of migration. So what we need to be doing, aside from decompressing the drivers and offloading the drivers, which we can start to do on day one, in addition, we will spend our tax dollars on providing the infrastructure so that we have background checks right away on the border, and we provide supportive housing if needed while people are being cleared. But we provide rapid clearance. We provide the migration attorneys. We provide the civil service people to quickly process migrants and bring them in and provide them the papers so they go to work right away on day one. People go to work. Our communities will be competing for migrants in order to grow their economies, not trying to shut them out. That is how we address the migration crisis here, by ending the causes that we are driving and by providing the real solutions. Migrants are said to bring $7 trillion worth of economic development to our country over the coming decade if we do this right, and we will do that right. Let me just address a couple other things, but again, I want to remind people that we are the alternative that you won't hear about. We are the solutions that Democrats and Republicans refuse to discuss, and in particular, the Democrats approach us by trying to shut us down, to silence us, to cancel us, because they're very threatened by the fact that we actually provide real solutions here instead of just parroting Republicans or moving to the right or providing no policies at all. So, Kamala Harris mentioned a couple policies tonight, but hardly anything. She's mostly following in the footsteps of Joe Biden, and I think that's what we can expect. As Biden reassured Wall Street nothing would change, and fundamentally nothing did change. We still have an economy where the stock market is doing great, where the upper 5, maybe 10% is doing well, the upper 1% is off the charts, but everyday people are absolutely struggling to survive. As I mentioned, over 60% living paycheck to paycheck, lacking healthcare, housing, security, and swamped in debt, medical debt, and student debt as well. So we've got those solutions. Join us at JillStein2024.com. The Democrats specifically are pulling out all the stops to throw us off the ballot with their army of lawyers. They are hiring infiltrators and spies in order to mess up in particular, our ballot drives, but also our organizations. And they hijacked our public matching funds and effectively kept us off the ballot in a couple of states. But let me report the good news that we are still fighting in court. In fact, we are taking Nevada now to the Supreme Court. And we are working with a wonderful set of lawyers, including Oliver Hall with the Center for Competitive Democracy, and Teresa Amato, whose organization name I'm not remembering at the moment, but we have absolutely powerful, amazing attorneys who will be fighting this case now at the Supreme Court, actually. And just to clarify, what happened in Nevada is that we achieved 3 times the number of signatures required. 30,000 voters in Nevada said they want another choice. They want, whether it's because we're the only anti-genocide option that's on the ballot across the country, or the only pro-worker option, the only climate emergency option. There were 30,000 voters in Nevada who said, put this other campaign on the ballot. The Secretary of State actually approved us for the ballot line, and then the Democratic Party challenged us based on some nonsense, which was quickly dismissed, and then they changed the cause of their case, their fight, which then had to do with some little footnote, essentially nonsense, which the court, the district court, said no go. That was ridiculous, that it really was not a legitimate issue. We won. And they then took it to the Supreme Court of Nevada, which overturned the decision and basically gave it away to the Democrats again. And this is based on the use of a form which had been recommended by the Secretary of State. We were using the correct form. The Secretary of State swapped it out for the incorrect form. This is like the kind of minutia that you have to be submerged in if you are trying to challenge power. And this is why the Democrats can get away with their army of lawyers to throw us off the ballot, because the whole process is just such a flaming mess. But the long and short of it is that we have wound up on the ballot for 95% of voters. So we are here to fight for an America that's going to work for all of us. And just to make a couple more points here, because I know it's been a long day, and you are all heroes for sticking with it, for being subjected to that assault from the duopoly, and for sticking around to hear the alternative. Let me just name a couple other solutions. We didn't really hear about a solution to healthcare, and we have an incredible healthcare crisis. I mentioned some of the statistics from before. The numbers of uninsured have not much budged, by the way, under the Affordable Care Act, which is not affordable for most Americans and which does not provide the care that's needed. And you're forced into narrow networks, and you can't get the care that you need. We need an improved Medicare for all system that provides care to everyone, which is comprehensive, including your reproductive health care, puts healthcare between you and your healthcare provider, provides for your mental health care, your dental care, your eyeglasses, your hearing aid, your chronic care. If your parents need institutional, I shouldn't say institutional, but if they need chronic care, you can get it at home. They don't have to go into an institution. They don't have to give up their lives. Chronic care is actually covered as well. So you can have a home health aide or a set of home health aides. So you can provide good quality care for your parents instead of having to consign them to a nursing home. Or if you have a child who needs care, same thing applies. We didn't hear about Medicare for all. They don't want you to know about Medicare for all, because it not only provides care for everyone, it also saves 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars. Instead, that money gets put into actually providing care for everyone. And we save so much by eliminating the red tape and the bureaucracy that we actually reduce the costs of healthcare. At the same time we expand healthcare, we reduce the costs by $500 billion a year. We also, by the way, call for cutting the military budget. The military budget is greater than the next 10 countries, the next 10 biggest spenders combined. We don't need that. What we have is what Martin Luther King described, the greatest purveyor of violence that the world has known. And I have to say a few words about Gaza, because again, what did we hear from Trump? What we've heard from him before, what we've heard from Donald Trump is that he would finish the job. He would just put an end to it. And, and he would continue to threaten those who protest genocide here in this country, as the Democrats do as well. They're all suppressing those who are standing up to stop genocide and falsely calling that anti-Semitism. Well, as a Jew, I would say that if you say it's anti-Semitic to oppose genocide, in my view, that is the most anti-Semitic thing you can possibly say, to imply that it is anti-Jewish to oppose genocide. I say not at all. I say it is a core Jewish value to oppose genocide. It is a core Muslim value to oppose genocide. It is a core Christian value. It is a core human value. And it is something that the American people have made very clear in large numbers. We want an end to the genocide now. We want diplomacy now to end it. And by a large majority, Americans also want a weapons embargo now to end the genocide. And this is, again, part of our day one agenda, long before day one. In fact, if we turn the White House into a greenhouse and make the world a better place by doing that, on day one, or I should say, actually, the day after the election, I pick up the phone and I'm calling Bibi Netanyahu and telling him that the genocide is over, because the weapons, the financial support, the diplomatic cover, the intelligence, all of it ends immediately until such time as Israel stops the genocide, begins to withdraw from Gaza and all the occupied territories, and the ethnic cleansing is over, and we begin to actually negotiate to come into full compliance with international law and the rulings of the International Court of Justice, which also call for an end to the settlements. The illegal settlements need to be ended. The land needs to be restored to its original owner. Homes need to be restored as well. This is all called for by international law. We need an end to this apartheid state, which, by the way, is ending itself right now because people are leaving by the droves. The economy is in a complete shambles. Israel has made a train wreck. And I should say it's the Netanyahu and the extremist right government and the long-term policies of Israel in support of ethnic cleansing and displacement that is incompatible with a future. Israel is self-destructing from within right now, as well as mobilizing its neighbors against it. So if we have the interests of Palestinians at heart, if we have the interests of Jews at heart who are settled now in that area, we need to begin to comply with international law and provide security, justice, and equal rights for everyone immediately, starting now. And that's my message to Netanyahu the day after the election. And I want to say that every vote for our campaign is a shot across the bow of the genocidal war machine. It is a shot across the bow of Democrats and Republicans who support this genocide, who fail to stand up for the American people and for international law and human rights. Every vote for us is a shot across the bow. And we say to everyone out there who's contemplating for voting for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, don't let them talk you into endorsing genocide, because that's what you're doing if you vote for either of them. You are effectively affirming genocide. You are enabling genocide. You are promoting the funding, the continued funding for genocide. So this is really critical for us to stand up and stand together. This is, as you may know, this is my third run here for president, and I've never seen anything like this, that the American people are so inspired, so empowered, so full of an uprising right now. The American people are in an uprising to shut down this genocide, to put an end to empire, to transition to a foreign policy based on international law and human rights, and to reclaim our budget. In talking about cutting the military budget, which would basically give us an additional $500 billion a year to put into things we need right here at home. By cutting that military budget, we actually ensure that we have the resources we need, not only for healthcare, for housing, and we call for building 15 million units actually over the next decade, and to begin that immediately in our administration. We will build social housing, so-called public housing, which has been disinvested and allowed to deteriorate and has not kept up with the needs. So we will be cutting these endangering military expenditures and putting our tax dollars into our true needs here at home. Just to affirm that we're not hearing from Donald Trump or Kamala Harris what we need to be doing for the American people. We're not hearing about the actual crises that the American people are facing. So we have a perfect storm for building our power right now, for facing down these abusive governments, the abuse of our democracy, the war on our democracy. We don't have to wait for Donald Trump for fascism. And, here he is backing away from the Plan 2025, which, by the way, has been out there for decades. This is nothing new. This is something we have to stand up and fight. And the way we fight the drift to the right is by actually addressing the material needs of the American people who have been thrown under the bus. That is what is driving the surge to the right. And the Democrats keep enabling it. They lift up and they fund the most extremist Republicans as well. Their commitment to neoliberalism, to austerity, to privatization, to big tax giveaways, to endless war. This is what is driving people to the right. We saw a big surge to the right after the Wall Street bailouts by the two Democratic houses of Congress and the Democratic White House under Obama. It's the austerity of the Democrats. It's the neoliberalism of the Democrats. It is not the solution. It's actually a major driver of right-wing extremism. So don't think that you're stopping Donald Trump by voting for more of what is driving right-wing extremism through the Democrats. And again, we're not hearing from Kamala Harris real solutions. We're hearing some feel-good, ode to joy, which is what we've been hearing about for a long time, especially, since the DNC. And if you saw the footage of the upper ring of corporate suites overlooking the DNC, that's where the real control was, in those corporate suites paid for by corporate America, $500,000 up to $5 million per corporate suite. That is where the money's coming from. The Harris campaign is collecting money hand over fist, has more billionaire donors than ever. This is not to exonerate Donald Trump, but we don't spend a lot of time clarifying Donald Trump because his track record, unfortunately, is very clear. The Republicans and Donald Trump have been servants to Wall Street and really don't make much bones about it. I mean, you see some flip-flopping on issues like about war and so forth, but you're not seeing, solutions to actually meet the critical needs of the American people. The Democrats, on the other hand, are giving very confusing PR spin campaigns all the time about how they pretend to be solving our crises when they're not. The Inflation Reduction Act, for example, which Kamala Harris pointed out tonight, was the source of vast new fracking developments. The Inflation Reduction Act, which is their claim to, the great climate legislation, right, which opens up 60 million acres of offshore fossil fuel extraction every year. It requires that. That's mandated before any major renewable projects can be undertaken, and 2 million acres of onshore. So, we hear lots of nonsense for the Democrats, and they fail to fulfill their promises, like a $15 minimum wage. By the way, we're calling for a $25 minimum wage because that's what our families need right now. We're not hearing solutions like that. We're mostly hearing disinformation and blather from the Democrats and from Kamala Harris's policies. So I just really want to thank everybody for being here tonight and to encourage you to hold the fort, to double down, because it's never been more important. The crises have never been so basically over the top, and there is no better time for us to stand up and demand the solutions that actually put us on track for an America and a world that works for all of us. On day one, we can declare the climate emergency and unleash over $500 billion to start funding the Green New Deal and the jobs that we need to transition the economy. On day one, we end the genocidal war on Gaza And we begin to propose a military budget, which is going to cut our very aggressive, over-the-top military by at least 50% and put those dollars here into our critical needs here at home and security here at home. On day one, we launch an antitrust lawsuit against the corporate consolidated media so we can, again, restore our First Amendment rights, not only to free speech, but in particular to freedom of the press. So we can have the press once again acting as a watchdog to power, not a lapdog to power, which it is currently in its current corporate consolidated format. On day one, we also bring back town hall meetings so that we can hold our elected officials accountable. So they're talking to us, not just to their big corporate donors. On day one, we bring back congressional hearings so that we can set the record straight and actually begin to educate elected officials and the American people. On day one, we legalize marijuana and we begin to treat our drug crisis as a public health crisis, not as a law, as a legal crisis. And we release from prison so many 100,000 people or more who have been wrongfully incarcerated, and many of them are still in jail. So there is so much that we can do. This is, an unprecedented crisis, but we're seeing an absolutely unprecedented uprising. We are now running really strong among Muslim Americans and Arab Americans. We have a very strong vote. In fact, we're either tied on some polls with Kamala Harris, or we are leading, strongly leading. And, the Arab Americans and Muslim Americans have had a front row seat in the excesses of empire and the inhumanity of empire and the destruction and the Islamophobia and all of that. They've had a front row seat on empire. So they are standing up really and leading the charge for a new world and a new America that's going to work for all of us. And students are leading the charge as well and are back now on their campuses and are still going strong. I understand there's a huge demonstration, in fact, that went on this evening outside of the debates as well, calling for an end to these genocidal wars. So America is ready to step up. In the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. We are that demand. And as Alice Walker reminded us, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We've got the numbers, we've got the solutions, we have the values of the American people, and we have the makings of an unprecedented coalition for us to be working together. And do not rule out the possibility of a really unexpected development in this election. This election has been full of unexpected developments. So don't let them talk you into hopelessness or powerlessness. It is not impossible for this race to be turned on its head. And it is not impossible. It is extremely highly likely that we will make a strong showing. And whether that is 5% or 15% or 35%, enough to win a three-way race, or even 50%. I would not rule out any of that. And however far we get is the jumping off point for us to continue the building, for us to continue the organizing. We need to stop genocide immediately and to begin to reverse the ethnic cleansing and the apartheid state. But it doesn't end there. We've got an empire to dismantle and to transition from a monopolar world, which is not working, which is bringing us to two hot wars on the verge of a third, given U.S. foreign policy right now. We need to move from that monopolar world to a multipolar world where we join the community of nations as an adult under international law and human rights, using diplomacy to actually build the better world that we deserve and that is within our reach. Thank you all again so very much. Join us if you can make a contribution at jillstein2024.com. Please do sign up to volunteer, because we are now entering the get out the vote stage of the campaign. Finally, now that the ballot drives are behind us, congratulations to everyone for the successful execution of that ballot drive. We are on the ballot strong. We have write-in campaigns to run in approximately 6 or 7, maybe 8 states. In most states, we're on the ballot, including all the swing states. We're on the ballot. We're in court on 2 of them, but we are on the ballot, really, thanks to your hard work, thanks to your spreading the word, you're getting out and collecting those signatures. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and thank you from all of our team, which is so very grateful to you. But now we're in the get out the vote phase, and this is about encouraging people to stand up with the courage of their convictions. This is all about flyering, tabling, door knocking, and phone banking. It's not rocket science. It's about turning the crank of a real democracy that we have a chance to actually restore. We don't have, it's not a democracy if we're not in the race. If we're not in the race, if we're not, there in the voting booth, if we're not there loud and strong among voters, then, this is just Wall Street and the war machine and AIPAC that are flexing their muscles through these 2 parties. Remember, 1 out of every 3 eligible voters chose not to vote in 2020 because they weren't aware that there are other options. Those non-voters are disproportionately of color, low income, and young, exactly the people who want to hear our agenda, who will benefit from free public higher education and canceling of student debt, which I didn't have a chance to mention yet, but that's part of the picture too. So we have so much to bring in voters who don't know about us, and to ensure that everybody's out there getting registered, and they won't know what hit them. The empire and the oligarchy will not see this coming because they don't poll people who are not their traditional voters. But that's really who America is, who represents our deep values, our beloved community that we need to be with each other. I should mention also reparations, which is a major issue for our campaign that will not be represented if we are not in this race running strong. So there are so many people who need to hear from us and about us. We can completely change the dynamics of this election and of all elections to come. So again, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, and I hope to see you soon on the campaign trail. Big shout out to all our team that was here helping tonight, to Kelly Merrill and Jason Call and Georgia Davenport and Justin Paglino, Mark Alborno and Rose Roby, Dave Schwab, LeBeau Panadow, Betsy Avila, David Schwab I named. Forgive me if I haven't named you, but a big thank you to our unbelievably hardworking team, and a big thank you to all of you out there. All of us are going to the mat right now. We're all aware that we are ourselves in the target hairs of this empire, which is endangering us all and impoverishing us all and conducting a war on working people and democracy here at home. We can fix this. We have the solutions to do that. And together we are an unstoppable team. Let's seize the moment together. And thank you